When I first set eyes on the property that would soon become mine, the world seemed to fall silent around me. The road leading their wound through a stretch of forest, a long gravel path lined with maple and pine, and when I finally reached the clearing, the lake appeared like a mirror to the sky, wide, still, and breathtakingly clear. It wasn't some tiny pond or seasonal waterhole, it was a true lake, deep enough to catch the reflections of clouds, large enough that the breeze could send gentle ripples across its glassy surface. I stood there for several minutes, hands in my pockets, breathing in the scent of damp earth and pine needles, listening to the distant call of a loon. I'd spent years searching for a place where I could build something that was entirely mine, a quiet refuge from the endless rules and noise of city life. And the moment I saw that lake, I knew I had found it. The realtor, a cheerful man with sunburned cheeks, handed me the survey map and pointed out the property lines. Everything from that fence line over there, he said, to the far tree line across the lake, that's all yours. The entire body of water sits within your parcel. You'll have complete ownership. His voice carried a note of pride, the way a person might speak about a hidden gem few others had the chance to see. My heart swelled at the thought. I'd always loved water, its quiet strength, its patience, and now, for the first time in my life, I could wake up each morning and look out over my own private lake. The purchase process took months, with endless signatures, title searches, and county approvals, but when the final papers came through, I drove out to the property with nothing but a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and a sense of disbelief. I sat by the water's edge that morning and watched the sun climb over the trees. The reflection was so perfect, it seemed like a second world beneath the surface. Ducks floated lazily by, and a fish broke the surface with a small splash that echoed across the stillness. It felt sacred, not just beautiful, but mine. The land was quiet except for the wind, and that quiet felt earned, like something rare in a world obsessed with control and conformity. To the north, just beyond a narrow line of trees, I could see the rooftops of a small neighborhood, rows of identical beige houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and a gated entrance with a shiny brass sign. Maple Ridge Estates. The realtor had mentioned it when I first toured the property. That's the HOA development I told you about, he said. Your land borders them, but the lake's boundary doesn't overlap. Their common area stops about 15 feet short of your shoreline. The lake isn't part of their jurisdiction. I remember smiling at that. After years of renting in cities where landlords and homeowners associations dictated everything from window blinds to mailbox color, the idea of owning something completely free of their reach was more than appealing, it was liberating. In the first few weeks after moving in, I threw myself into making the place feel like home. I built a simple dock from cedar planks, the kind of structure that creaks softly underfoot and smells of sun-warmed wood. I cleared a path through the brush down to the water, stacked a ring of stones for a fire pit, and placed an old rocking chair at the edge of the dock. My days began early, coffee in hand, mist rising off the lake, and ended with sunsets that painted the water in gold and amber. Sometimes I'd bring out my canoe, an old green one I'd restored myself, and spend an hour paddling in slow, lazy circles. It was the kind of peace I hadn't felt since childhood. I could hear frogs croaking in the reeds, the wind whispering through the trees, and nothing else. The silence was a balm I hadn't realized I'd been craving, but peace has a way of attracting envy. At first, I noticed small signs that the homeowners from Maple Ridge were curious about my new presence. People began to appear along their side of the tree line, walking dogs or pushing strollers, lingering just a little too long when they reached the fence. A few waved, I waved back. One afternoon, while fixing the railing on my dock, I saw two teenagers standing at the far end of their path, staring at the water. "Is that your lake?" one of them called out. I nodded. "It's private property," I said gently, "but you can enjoy the view from there." They smiled and left, and I didn't think much of it. But a few days later, when I went down to the water for my morning coffee, I found footprints in the sand, fresh ones, and an empty soda can bobbing near the shore. Someone had been there. I didn't want to assume the worst, so I let it go. Still, I put up a small, tasteful sign by the path. Private lake, no trespassing. It wasn't meant to be hostile, just clear. A week later, a golf cart rolled up to my gate. 3 people stepped out, dressed like they'd come straight from a board meeting. The man in front, tall and confident, introduced himself as Robert, president of the Maple Ridge HOA. He had that practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Beautiful property you've got here," he said, glancing toward the lake. "We wanted to stop by and talk about the community lake access." I frowned. "Community lake access?" I repeated, "You must be mistaken. The lake isn't part of your development. It's on my deed." Robert gave a short laugh, as if I'd made an amusing but naive comment. "Well, technically, the residents of Maple Ridge have always considered that lake part of the neighborhood," he said. "It's been used for years. Kids fish there, people kayak. It's tradition." I kept my tone polite. "I understand, but tradition doesn't override ownership. The boundary lines are clearly drawn." The woman beside him, holding a clipboard, jumped in. "We'll need to verify that with our board," she said sharply. "If it turns out the lake falls within the HOA's environmental easement, we'll expect you to cooperate with community maintenance." She said cooperate like it was a command. I told them I'd be happy to share my property documents, but that the lake was explicitly private and fully contained within my lot. They exchanged glances, muttering about misfiled maps and pending adjustments. As they left, the man smiled again, but this time it was strained. "We'll be in touch," he said. That evening, I found a paper taped to my gate, an official-looking notice with the HOA letterhead at the top. It accused me of blocking community access to shared natural resources and violating neighborhood policy. I couldn't help but laugh. Neighborhood policy? I wasn't even part of their neighborhood. The next morning, I called the county recorder's office just to confirm what I already knew. The clerk pulled up the parcel map and said, "Oh, yes, you're well outside the HOA boundary. Your lake isn't even listed on their jurisdiction map. You're good." It was reassuring to hear it from an official source, but it also made me realize how audacious the HOA had been. They weren't confused, they were testing me, seeing if I'd roll over. I decided not to respond to their letter, at least not yet. Instead, I added another sign by the water line, a bit firmer this time: "Private property, no HOA access. Trespassers will be reported." That night, sitting by the campfire, I watched the lake glow orange in the firelight and thought about how fragile peace can be. I had bought this land to escape the constant oversight of rules and committees, to have a place where I could breathe freely. But now it seemed that even out here, bureaucracy was creeping up the shoreline. The water lapped gently against the dock, and the stars shimmered above, as if the universe was reminding me that some things are still wild, still worth protecting. I made a quiet promise to myself then. No one, no board, no HOA president would take this lake from me. It wasn't about property value or paperwork anymore. It was about the principle of freedom. The right to sit by my own water under my own sky without asking anyone's permission. It was one of those soft, golden mornings that make you forget the world beyond your own backyard. The air was cool and smelled faintly of pine and lake mist. I had invited 2 friends from work to spend the weekend with me, both of them city people unaccustomed to silence, and they couldn't get over how still the lake was, how you could hear the wings of ducks before you saw them. We had just started the grill for lunch when I saw a few people gathering on the far side of the tree line, the border that separated my property from the HOA's manicured walking path. They stood in a small cluster, whispering, gesturing toward the lake. I recognized one of them immediately. Robert, the HOA president, his crisp polo gleaming in the sun like a badge of authority. He was holding a phone and talking animatedly to someone pacing near the edge of the water. I sighed. I had half expected something like this. Ever since my last polite but firm notice, I hadn't heard a peep from the HOA, but I'd noticed more and more people lingering by the fence taking photos and muttering about community rights. I told my friends to keep enjoying themselves and went inside to grab the folder I'd started calling my peace of mind file, copies of my deed, the survey map, and all the correspondence with the county confirming the property boundaries. By the time I stepped back outside, I heard the unmistakable wail of a police siren echoing down the gravel road. A patrol car pulled up near my gate, its lights flashing. Two sheriff's deputies stepped out, both calm and professional, scanning the property. One approached me while the other stayed by the car, his hand resting casually near his belt. Afternoon, the first deputy said, "We got a call from the Homeowners Association over in Maple Ridge. They said there's been a dispute about access to this lake, something about you blocking community property." I could almost hear the quotation marks around community property. I handed him my folder without a word. "You might want to take a look at these," I said evenly. He flipped through the papers while I explained the situation, how the HOA had claimed authority over the lake, how my deed clearly placed the entire water body within my property line, and how they'd been warned multiple times to stop trespassing. The deputy nodded, tracing the survey line on the map with his finger. "Looks pretty clear to me," he said. "This lake's yours, no question." He turned and looked across the water toward the group of HOA members, now watching the scene unfold from behind the trees. "You mind if I go talk to them?" he asked. "Not at all," I said, crossing my arms. He walked over, calling out to Robert and the others. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but their body language told the story. Robert was red-faced, waving his arms, jabbing a finger toward my dock. The deputy stood calmly, listening, occasionally glancing back at me and shaking his head. After a few minutes, he raised his hand to cut Robert off and said something that made the man's shoulders slump. The group dispersed shortly after, muttering under their breath. When the deputy came back, he smiled. "They seem to think they have rights to the lake because their development used to use it," he said, "but that's not how ownership works." I explained that unless they can produce legal documentation, which they can't, they have no standing here. "You're in the clear." Relief washed over me, mixed with a flicker of amusement. "Thanks, officer," I said. "I figured as much." He tipped his hat. "No problem. Happens more than you'd think with these associations. Have a good day." When the patrol car rolled away, I thought maybe finally the matter was settled, but later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out my laptop and began researching the lake's history, how it was formed, how the land had been parceled. That's when I stumbled on something fascinating. The lake drained into a narrow stream at its southern edge, a stream that eventually flowed into a protected wetland about 3 miles south. According to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, that wetland was classified as a federally navigable waterway. I read the fine print carefully, my excitement growing with every line. Because the lake directly fed into that stream, it was technically part of the same federal water system. That meant the HOA, or even the county, had no authority to regulate, claim, or impose restrictions on it. In other words, any attempt to control the lake wasn't just local overreach, it was an interference with federally recognized waters. The next day, I called a friend of mine who worked in environmental law. She confirmed my discovery. "You're right," she said. "If the lake drains into a federally regulated waterway, it falls under federal jurisdiction for environmental purposes. The HOA can't touch it. They'd have to petition the state, and even then, they'd be laughed out of the room." I thanked her and hung up, already printing copies of the relevant statutes. I highlighted the sections that mention property rights, jurisdiction limits, and federal oversight. Then, for good measure, I printed the official map from the Corps of Engineers database showing the Waterway connection. The next morning, I laminated everything and mounted it on a wooden post by the dock. The new sign read, "Private property, federal waterway connection, unauthorized access subject to federal penalty." It was a simple message, but it carried the weight of law. A few days passed quietly until one Saturday afternoon when I was working on my canoe. The rumble of an engine broke the peace, and I looked up to see a maintenance boat, small, aluminum, with a faded HOA sticker on the side, rolling down the path toward the lake. Two men in safety vests were aboard, one holding a net and the other fiddling with a clipboard. I set down my wrench and walked toward the shore. "Can I help you?" I called out. The man with the clipboard looked startled. "We're here for debris removal," he said. "The Homeowners Association sent us." I pointed toward the new sign, gleaming in the sun. "You might want to read that first," I said. They both leaned over to look. One frowned. The other read it out loud under his breath. When he reached the words Federal Waterway Connection, they froze. Wait, the first one said, quietly, Federal. I nodded. That's right. Any unauthorized access or alteration could be considered a violation under the Clean Water Act. I've already spoken to a lawyer. They exchanged glances, whispered something, and then, without another word, turned the boat around and rolled it back up the path. I stood there for a moment, watching them retreat, and couldn't help but laugh. Later that week, an envelope appeared in my mailbox, this one stamped from the HOA's law firm. I braced myself for more bluster, but when I opened it, I nearly smiled. The letter was short, almost apologetic. It stated that the association would no longer pursue access to or involvement with the lake in question and expressed regret for any confusion or misunderstanding. That was it. No threats, no conditions, just surrender written in legal language. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my file. Since then, the lake has been mine in every sense of the word, peaceful, undisturbed, and finally respected. The HOA hasn't so much as looked in my direction. On calm mornings, I sit on my dock with a cup of coffee, watching the mist lift off the water. Sometimes I can see the edge of the HOA neighborhood in the distance. The same people who once called the police now pretending the lake doesn't exist. The reflection of their rooftops ripples faintly across the surface, fragile and temporary. The irony isn't lost on me. They tried to control what wasn't theirs to stretch their rules beyond reason. And in doing so, they reminded me exactly why I'd come here, to live on my own terms, unbound by committees or covenants. Now, when I see the sunlight glitter on the water or hear the soft creak of the dock beneath my feet, I feel an even deeper satisfaction, not just in owning the land, but in defending it, in standing firm against people who confuse authority with entitlement. The lake is more than property now. It's proof that independence still has power, that the law can protect the quiet corners of life when you know where to look. Sometimes, when the evening settles in and the sky turns copper, I raise a glass to the still water and think to myself, here's to the line, and to never letting anyone cross it again.